You can feel it, even if you can't name it yet. Not urgency, not anxiety, not excitement. Something quieter than all of that. A suspension. As if your life has been held in a delicate balance for longer than feels natural, waiting for a weight to finally be placed on one side. Nothing dramatic has happened. Nothing has collapsed. And yet something has stopped moving forward in the way it used to. Decisions that once felt flexible now carry a strange heaviness. Options that used to feel open no longer feel neutral. There is a pressure without force, a pause without rest. And that sensation is not random. It is the signature of a system approaching commitment. For a long time, you've been living in what could be called a soft phase of reality, a period where outcomes remain negotiable, where identities can be tested without consequence, where paths can be imagined, entertained, rehearsed, and quietly abandoned without the world responding too strongly. In this phase, reality allows ambiguity, it tolerates delay. It lets you exist between versions of yourself without asking you to choose which one is real. Most people don't even realize this phase exists. They just sense that time feels strangely forgiving, that nothing is quite locked in yet, that there's still room to decide later. And for a while that is true, but softness is never permanent. Every system, biological, psychological, physical, eventually requires coherence, a direction, a dominant pattern. And when that moment approaches, it does not arrive with noise, it arrives with stillness, with the feeling that something subtle has shifted in the background while nothing obvious has changed on the surface. You may have noticed it as restlessness that doesn't lead anywhere, or a calm that feels unfamiliar rather than peaceful, or the sense that you're circling the same internal questions, not because you're confused, but because something is quietly waiting for you to stop circling. What's important to understand is this. During a soft phase, inaction truly is neutral. You can hesitate without consequence, you can explore without committing, you can delay without being penalized by the system. But as the phase begins to close, neutrality dissolves. The system stops interpreting your state as undecided and starts interpreting it as chosen. Not because you consciously declared anything, but because patterns speak louder than intentions. Repetition becomes information. Avoidance becomes preference. Delay becomes direction. You might feel this already. The subtle sense that standing still no longer feels like standing still. That doing nothing now seems to lean somewhere. That even your silence has weight. This is not pressure coming from outside your life. It's not society. It's not expectation. It's not time running out in a dramatic sense. It's the internal mechanics of alignment beginning to activate. And once they do, the system stops waiting for clarity and starts responding to coherence. Here is where most people misunderstand what's happening. They assume the discomfort means something is wrong, that they need more information, more certainty, more reassurance before they can move. But this phase is not asking you to act yet. It's asking you to recognize that the conditions are changing, that the rules that applied a few months ago no longer apply in the same way, that the flexibility you once had is slowly giving way to consequence, not as punishment, but as structure. You haven't failed to decide, you've been allowed not to, until now. And this is where the feeling becomes unmistakable, because when a system is about to lock into a dominant trajectory, it sends a final signal, not a command, not an ultimatum, a signal, a moment of heightened awareness where you can still feel the softness, but you can also feel it thinning, like ice before it freezes, like breath before it condenses, like a door that is still open but no longer wide. If you listen closely, you'll notice that your attention has changed. The things that once distracted you no longer work as well. The excuses that once sounded reasonable now feel hollow, even to you. You're not panicked, you're alert. There is a difference. Panic scatters, alertness focuses. And right now, something in you is focusing, even if you haven't consciously directed it yet. This is not about destiny. It's not about fate stepping in. It's about probability organizing itself around the signal you've been broadcasting without realizing it. Every system does this. It reads patterns, it amplifies what is repeated, it stabilizes around what is consistent. and very soon reality will begin responding as if a choice has already been made. Because from the system's perspective it has. You can feel why this moment matters, not because something dramatic is about to happen, but because something subtle is about to stop being adjustable. The softness you've been living in is real, and so is its ending. This is the quiet before coherence, the pause before commitment, the moment where awareness still gives you leverage. And this is only the beginning. The soft phase does not end because you run out of time. It ends because the system runs out of ambiguity. Every living system, from the brain to ecosystems to physical fields, tolerates uncertainty only up to a point. Beyond that threshold, instability becomes inefficient. Energy begins to reorganize, signals are weighted, patterns are selected, and what feels like pressure to you is simply coherence asserting itself where flexibility once lived. You were not drifting because you were lost. You were drifting because drift was allowed. The system had not yet required a dominant signal from you. In psychological terms, this is called liminality, and the in-between state where identity is fluid and outcomes remain reversible. In physical terms, it resembles superposition, multiple possibilities held simultaneously, none yet collapsed into form. In nervous system terms, it is a regulated suspension, a holding pattern where threat is low and exploration is possible. These states feel strangely gentle, forgiving, as if life is giving you room to breathe before it asks you to decide how you will move. But here is the part most people never notice while it is happening. Liminal states are not neutral holding zones. They are preparatory fields. They exist so that information can be gathered, signals can stabilize, and the system can determine which configuration is most likely to hold. While you believed you were waiting, the system was listening. While you believed you were undecided, patterns were being measured. Your habits, your thoughts, your emotional responses, your tolerances, all of it has been registering quietly, forming a signal stronger than conscious intention. This is why the feeling has shifted, because the system no longer needs more data. It has enough. And once that happens, the nature of time itself changes. The future stops feeling spacious and starts feeling directional. Not urgent, directional. You may notice that imagining certain paths now feels heavier than it used to, while imagining others feels oddly calm, even if they still scare you. That is not intuition in the mystical sense. It is alignment pressure. It is the system nudging probability toward coherence. In a soft phase, effort and outcome are loosely coupled. You can try things without them sticking. You can pull back without consequence. But as coherence approaches, effort and outcome begin to lock together. Small actions carry more weight. Small avoidances carry more cost. What once felt inconsequential begins to echo. This is why doing nothing now feels different than it did before. It is no longer empty space. It is interpreted space. It points somewhere. You may have been telling yourself that you're waiting for clarity, but clarity does not arrive before coherence. It arrives because of it. Systems do not clarify first and commit later. They commit first, then stabilize perception around the commitment. And this is why people often say, "I only understood it after I chose." That is not hindsight bias. That is how reality works. Clarity is an effect, not a prerequisite. This is also why the discomfort you feel does not resolve through thinking. You cannot reason your way back into softness. The nervous system knows when a phase has ended long before the mind catches up. That's why distraction feels thin, why reassurance doesn't land, why familiar coping mechanisms suddenly feel outdated. You're not broken, you're outgrowing a state that was never meant to be permanent. And here is the critical shift that's happening now. The system is no longer asking, "What might you do?" It is beginning to ask, "What are you consistently signaling?" Consistency is everything at this stage, not motivation, not desire, not what you say you want. The system responds to what repeats, what stabilizes, what you return to when no one is watching. This is where procrastination becomes dangerous, not morally, but structurally, because delay is not absence of signal. Delay is a signal. Repeated hesitation communicates preference for the familiar. Repeated deferral communicates tolerance for the current state. Repeated suppression of truth communicates allegiance to the old structure, and the system, being efficient, responds accordingly. You can feel why this matters now, because something in you already knows that the cost of misalignment is rising, that staying in a half-chosen life will soon require more energy than choosing fully. This is why the pressure feels quiet but insistent. It is not pushing you forward, it is removing the cushion that made staying put comfortable. Most people miss this window because they misinterpret the calm as safety. They assume that because nothing is exploding, nothing is changing. But the most decisive shifts do not announce themselves with chaos. They announce themselves with precision, with a narrowing, with the sense that fewer options feel real, even if you can still imagine them intellectually. This is the moment where reality begins to behave differently around you. You may notice subtle feedback loops tightening, certain opportunities no longer appearing, certain dynamics repeating until they become impossible to ignore, certain inner questions returning with more insistence and less tolerance for avoidance. These are not tests, they are confirmations, the system reflecting back the signal it is preparing to stabilize around. And this is where awareness becomes leverage, because while the lock-in moment has not fully arrived, consciousness still matters. Recognition still alters trajectory. Seeing the mechanism interrupts automatic selection. It gives you a narrow but powerful margin where coherence can be chosen consciously rather than inherited passively. You are not being asked to force a decision yet. You are being asked to notice that the conditions have changed, that neutrality is thinning, that softness is giving way to structure, that soon reality will stop asking what you intend and start responding to what you embody. You can feel this because you are ready to feel it. Not everyone reaches this phase with awareness intact. Many slide into commitment unconsciously, waking up years later, wondering how their life hardened around choices they never remember making. You are here because something in you is still awake at the edge of this transition. And what comes next is where this becomes unmistakable. Because once a system approaches coherence, it does not simply lock in. It signals that it is about to, and that signal is arriving now. Up until now, your life has been able to carry more than one future at once. Not symbolically, structurally. Multiple versions of you have been allowed to coexist in the background, each one fed just enough attention to remain viable. One path slightly explored, another quietly postponed, another imagined but never acted on. In a soft phase, this multiplicity is sustainable. Reality can hold competing signals without demanding resolution, but as coherence approaches, that tolerance disappears. Probability begins to collapse. Not all at once, not dramatically, but decisively. This is where most people misunderstand what choice actually is. They think choice happens in the mind at the moment of decision when a clear option is selected and acted upon. But systems don't work that way. Systems read momentum. They read reinforcement. They read what receives energy over time. By the time the mind believes it is choosing, the system has often already leaned. This is why certain outcomes begin to feel inevitable long before anything visibly changes. You sense the direction before you can explain it. That sensation is not imagination. It is probability organizing itself around a dominant signal. You may have noticed that certain possibilities no longer feel equally real. You can still think about them, but they feel thin, distant, like scenery you've already passed. Meanwhile, other trajectories feel closer, heavier, more present, even if you haven't fully committed to them yet. This is not because you've decided, it's because the field has started to weight them differently. Attention, emotion, repetition, these are the currencies of probability. Where they flow consistently, structure forms. This is also why the discomfort you feel now has a different quality than before. It's not the anxiety of uncertainty. It's the tension of compression. When probability collapses, space narrows. The system reduces degrees of freedom in order to stabilize. To the mind, this can feel like pressure. To the nervous system, it feels like insistence. To the body, it feels like a quiet refusal to continue pretending that everything is still open. And here is the crucial part. Probability collapse does not require conscious agreement. It happens automatically when competing signals can no longer be sustained. This is why inaction becomes so powerful at this stage. Not choosing does not keep all futures alive. It feeds the one that requires the least deviation from what already exists. The system defaults to the path of least resistance, not because it is best, but because it is most coherent with existing momentum. You may recognize this in the way certain patterns keep repeating, even though you haven't chosen them deliberately. Relationships that loop, roles that persist, environments that seem to reform no matter how often you consider leaving them. This is not bad luck. It is probability responding to reinforcement. The system is stabilizing around what you continue to tolerate, not what you occasionally imagine. This is why awareness at this moment is so significant, because once probability collapses beyond a certain point, changing direction requires exponentially more energy, not because it is impossible, but because the system has already invested. Structures have formed, feedback loops have closed, the cost of deviation rises. Anyone who has tried to change their life years after ignoring an early signal understands this intuitively. You can do it, but it is heavier, slower, more disruptive. Right now, you are still before that full investment. The collapse has begun, but it is not complete. There is still a window where signal quality matters more than effort, where subtle internal shifts can redirect momentum without requiring dramatic external action. This is the advantage of catching the process early, of seeing the mechanism while it is still forming rather than after it has hardened. You might be tempted to ask, so what should I do? But that question comes too early. Action is not the lever yet, coherence is. The system is not waiting for a big move, it is waiting for signal alignment, for the version of you that is emerging to stop being diluted by the version you are reluctant to release. This is why half commitments feel so draining now. Why staying open feels heavier than choosing. Why hedging your identity no longer feels clever. It feels exhausting. Maintaining multiple futures requires energy. Letting one dissolve frees it. The fatigue you may be experiencing is not from doing too much. It is from carrying possibilities that no longer belong to you. Most people never realize that they are allowed to release futures. They assume that letting go of an option is failure or loss or limitation. But from the system's perspective, it is efficiency, it is refinement, it is clarity. And clarity is what allows probability to stabilize without friction. This is also where fear tends to surface. Not because something bad is coming, but because narrowing always feels like loss before it feels like focus. The mind mourns options even when they were never going to be lived, but the body knows when a particular future is no longer compatible with the signal you're emitting. That incompatibility is what creates tension, not danger, not punishment, misalignment. You may notice that imagining one version of your life now produces a subtle constriction, while imagining another produces a strange sense of relief, even if it also carries uncertainty. That relief is not relief from effort, it is relief from incoherence. It is the nervous system recognizing a trajectory that requires less internal contradiction. This is how probability speaks before it collapses fully. It does not give instructions, it gives sensations, weight, resistance, ease. These are not emotional reactions to fantasy. They are feedback from the system as it begins to commit, and commitment, once it passes a threshold, becomes self-reinforcing. The chosen trajectory generates experiences that confirm it. The unchosen ones fade, not because they were impossible, but because they are no longer funded by attention or energy. This is how lives quietly solidify, not through dramatic moments, but through unnoticed selections that compound. You are here because you are noticing, because something in you has recognized that the field is no longer neutral, that the softness is thinning, that probability is beginning to take sides. This recognition itself alters the collapse. It introduces a new variable, consciousness, into a process that usually runs automatically. And this is where the real decision point approaches. Not the moment where you act, but the moment where you stop feeding what you already know is misaligned. Where you allow a future to dissolve without resentment. Where you let coherence do what it is designed to do. Because very soon, probability will finish collapsing, and reality will begin responding as if the question has been answered. There is a moment in every system where flexibility gives way to structure, not suddenly, not violently, but decisively. It is the point where possibility stops floating and starts organizing, where the field no longer asks what might happen and begins preparing for what will. This is the lock-in moment, and it rarely arrives the way people expect. There is no surge of emotion, no external sign demanding attention. Instead, there is a quiet sense of finality settling in beneath the surface, long before anything in your life visibly changes. You are approaching that moment now, not because time is running out, but because the conditions that allowed ambiguity have been fulfilled. The system has gathered what it needed. It has observed your patterns long enough. It has measured your tolerances, your repetitions, your hesitations, your quiet truths. And as it prepares to stabilize, it sends one last signal. Not to push you, but to inform you that the rules are about to change. This is where many people misinterpret what they're feeling. They assume that because nothing is dramatic, nothing is serious. But the most consequential shifts are almost always subtle. Loud events create reaction. Quiet shifts create commitment. The lock-in moment is quiet because it is efficient. It does not need your panic. It needs your coherence. What makes this moment different from every other period of uncertainty you've lived through is that reversibility is thinning. You can still change direction, but it no longer happens automatically. After the lock-in, redirection requires force. It requires disruption. It requires dismantling structures that could have remained fluid if they had been acknowledged earlier. This is why the system signals before it commits, not to scare you, but to preserve efficiency. To offer one final chance for alignment before momentum hardens. You may notice that imagining going back now feels heavier than imagining moving forward into the unknown. That is not courage. It is cost awareness. The system is showing you which paths are becoming expensive, which ones require increasing energy just to maintain, and which ones, while still uncertain, feel strangely simpler to breathe into. This is not romantic intuition, it is structural feedback. The lock-in moment does not care what you say you want, it cares what you are willing to continue sustaining. This is why half-lived lives become so uncomfortable right before they stabilize, because the system is reducing tolerance for contradiction. You cannot keep broadcasting mixed signals and expect reality to remain flexible. At some point, the field demands a dominant frequency, and when it does, it selects based on coherence, not desire. This is where inaction becomes especially costly. Not choosing does not preserve optionality anymore. It reinforces whatever is already most consistent. If you continue to avoid, the system assumes avoidance is the preference. If you continue to tolerate, it assumes tolerance is alignment. If you continue to postpone, it assumes postponement is the chosen rhythm. None of this happens morally, it happens mechanically. You may feel a strange urgency that doesn't tell you what to do, only that something must resolve. That is exactly how lock-in announces itself. It does not give instructions because it is not interested in micromanaging your life. It is interested in stabilization. Once stabilization occurs, feedback loops close. Reality begins reflecting back the chosen trajectory with increasing clarity. Opportunities align in one direction, friction increases in another. The world starts cooperating with one version of you and quietly resisting the others. Most people only notice this after the fact. They wake up years later and say, "I don't remember choosing this life." But they did, slowly, repetitively, unconsciously. They chose it by continuing to show up in the same way long after the system stopped offering neutrality. The lock-in happened quietly and life simply followed through. You are being shown this now because the lock-in has not completed. You are still in the narrow corridor where awareness can redirect momentum without requiring upheaval. This is the last phase where recognition is enough. where honesty with yourself carries more power than action, where releasing a misaligned future requires less effort than sustaining it. This is also why the emotional tone of this moment is so particular. It is not dramatic. It is sober, clean. There is a sense of seriousness without fear, of significance without intensity. That tone is not accidental. It is how the system communicates when it expects comprehension rather than reaction. You may notice that certain narratives no longer work on you, the ones that say you have plenty of time, or nothing is decided yet, or you can always change later. Those statements are not false in an absolute sense. They are simply outdated for where you are now. The truth is more precise. You can change later, but it will cost more. You will have time, but it will no longer be forgiving. Nothing is decided yet, but it is preparing to be. The lock-in moment does not punish hesitation. It finalizes patterns. It closes the loop between signal and structure. And once it does, reality becomes less interested in your internal debates and more responsive to your embodied state. Life begins to feel more solid, more directional, less malleable. This is when people either feel grounded or trapped, depending on whether the chosen trajectory was aligned. You are still before that point, but not far before it. Close enough to feel its gravity. Close enough that pretending otherwise feels dishonest. Close enough that continuing to live ambiguously requires effort rather than ease. This is why this moment matters. Not because something external is about to happen, but because something internal is about to stop being adjustable. The softness that protected you is giving way to structure. And structure, once it forms, carries you whether you're ready or not. What happens next depends on what you allow to stabilize, and that realization is not meant to rush you, it is meant to focus you. Right before a system locks into form, there is a brief interval where alignment matters more than action. This is the phase you are in now. The mistake most people make here is assuming they must do something dramatic to influence what comes next. But action is not the primary signal the system is reading yet. Coherence is. The field is not watching for movement. It is watching for consistency between what you feel, what you tolerate, and what you continue to feed with your attention. This is why forcing decisions right now often feels wrong. Not because you are avoiding responsibility, but because premature action introduces noise. The system is already sensitive. It is already measuring. What it needs is a clean signal, not a frantic one. Coherence emerges when you stop contradicting yourself internally. When you stop maintaining options you already know you won't live. When you stop telling one truth privately and performing another publicly. These small internal realignments speak louder than any external gesture at this stage. You may notice that certain things no longer require willpower to resist. They simply fall away. Conversations you no longer want to have, roles you no longer want to play, explanations you no longer feel obligated to give. This is not withdrawal, it is refinement. It is the system shedding excess so that the remaining signal can sharpen. Coherence often looks like simplification before it looks like progress. What matters now is not what you choose to chase, but what you stop feeding. Attention is currency, so is tolerance. Every time you continue something out of habit rather than truth, you reinforce a trajectory you claim you don't want. Every time you delay an honest admission, you keep a misaligned future artificially alive. Coherence begins when you allow those futures to dissolve without negotiating with them. This can feel unsettling because identity has inertia. Even when a version of you is no longer true, it can still feel familiar. Letting it go can feel like loss, even if it was never going to be lived. But from the system's perspective, release is not loss, it is resolution. It frees energy that was being spent on maintaining contradiction. That freed energy is what allows the chosen trajectory to stabilize smoothly rather than through crisis. You might be tempted to seek reassurance during this phase, from people, from information, from signs that you're doing it right. But reassurance is a symptom of misalignment, not a solution. When coherence is present, reassurance becomes unnecessary. There is a quiet sense of rightness that does not need to be defended or explained. It does not eliminate uncertainty, but it removes internal resistance to it. This is why honesty with yourself carries disproportionate power right now. Not confession, not disclosure, honesty. The kind that happens when no one is watching. When you admit what you no longer want to carry. When you acknowledge which version of your life feels complete and which one feels expired. These acknowledgements may not change anything externally in the moment, but they immediately alter the signal you're emitting. The system responds quickly to these shifts, not by rewarding you, but by reducing friction. Things that felt heavy begin to feel unnecessary. Things that felt confusing begin to feel irrelevant. The field starts organizing around what remains after contradiction is removed. This is the beginning of stabilization, and it can feel like relief long before anything visibly improves. It's important to understand that coherence does not require certainty. You do not need to know exactly where you are going. You only need to know where you are no longer willing to stay. The system does not require a detailed blueprint. It requires directional integrity. A willingness to stop pretending that all futures are equally viable when they are not. This is also where courage quietly enters. Not the dramatic kind that makes bold declarations, but the subtle kind that stops self-betrayal. The courage to disappoint expectations that no longer fit. The courage to allow ambiguity in the external world while resolving it internally. The courage to let your behavior catch up to your awareness without rushing the process. You may notice that your body already understands this. There is a calm that appears when you imagine living in alignment, even if the path there is unclear. And there is a fatigue that appears when you imagine continuing as you are, even if it is familiar. These sensations are not emotional reactions, they are coherence feedback, the nervous system responding to anticipated integrity or continued contradiction. This is why the field is not asking you to leap. It is asking you to stop resisting what you already know, to stop sustaining what you are finished with, to allow the soft phase to close cleanly rather than through collapse. When coherence precedes commitment, stabilization is gentle. When it doesn't, stabilization becomes corrective. Very soon, reality will commit to the signal you are most consistently embodying. Not the one you talk about, not the one you aspire to in theory, the one you live when you are tired, unobserved, and honest. This is why small internal shifts matter so much right now. They are not small to the system. You are not late. You are precisely where you need to be to influence what comes next. But this influence is subtle. It operates beneath action, beneath strategy, beneath performance. It operates at the level of alignment. And alignment does not ask for effort. It asks for truth. If you listen closely, you can feel that something has already shifted while you've been here. Not because you've decided anything yet, but because awareness itself changes the field. The moment a system is seen clearly, it can no longer operate unconsciously. What was automatic becomes optional. What was drifting becomes directional. And what was quietly forming in the background now steps into the foreground of your attention. This is the moment before reality commits. The moment where softness has not fully disappeared, but it is no longer protecting you from consequence. You can feel that the question is no longer abstract. It is no longer philosophical. It has become personal, embodied, immediate. Not urgent in a panicked way, inevitable in a precise one. Something in you already knows that continuing as you were will no longer feel neutral, that soon the system will respond as if the answer has been given. You are not standing at the edge of action, you are standing at the edge of coherence, and that distinction matters, because the version of you who reached this point is not the same as the one who began listening. Something has clarified, something has simplified. You may not have language for it yet, but your body recognizes it. The internal debate has quieted, the noise has thinned. What remains feels cleaner, even if it is still undefined. This is what a threshold feels like when it is real. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just unmistakable. You can sense that a chapter is ending, not because something external has forced it to, but because continuing it would now require effort. The system is withdrawing its tolerance for contradiction, and in that withdrawal it is offering you something rare, the chance to let alignment lead instead of correction. In a moment like this, nothing needs to be proven, nothing needs to be explained. What matters is acknowledgement. The simple recognition that you are no longer undecided in the way you once were, that you are no longer preparing, that you are no longer waiting for permission, clarity, or a sign that will make this easier. The clarity has already arrived, not as answers, but as honesty. This is the activation threshold. The point where the internal shift you are feeling becomes something you allow to be real, not for anyone else, not for performance, but because systems stabilize around what is acknowledged, around what is named, around what is allowed to exist without resistance. The version of you who crossed into this moment is already more coherent than the one who started. You can feel that. There is less negotiation, less internal splitting, less energy spent maintaining futures you no longer intend to live. That coherence is not something you need to build, it is something you need to recognize, and recognition is powerful. This is why ritual matters at moments like this, not because it creates the shift, but because it anchors it. It gives the system a clean signal, a point of reference, a declaration that coherence has been chosen consciously rather than inherited unconsciously. Writing something simple, something present tense, something true, not for me but for yourself, is how you stabilize what has already begun. So if this moment resonates, if you can feel the narrowing, the quiet seriousness, the sense that something is about to commit, I invite you to mark it. Write this in the comments to anchor this shift. I choose alignment before reality chooses for me. Not as a promise, not as a performance, as a recognition. A way of saying to yourself and to the field you are already interacting with that you are no longer drifting unconsciously into a future you didn't mean to select. If the declaration feels true, you may write it. Gently, simply, not to convince anyone, not to prove readiness, but to acknowledge coherence while it still has leverage. And after that, you don't need to do anything else, because what comes next does not require force. It requires follow-through. Reality will begin responding to the signal you are now most consistently embodying. Opportunities will align. Friction will clarify. The chosen trajectory will gain momentum, not because you pushed it, but because you stopped contradicting it. This is how lives quietly change direction. Not through dramatic moments, but through precise ones, through recognition, through release, through allowing what is already true to stabilize. The lock-in moment is not loud, but it is decisive, and now you know where you stand.